Our next speaker is going to be Anil Kamath from Adobe. Anil is a fellow and VP of technology at Adobe, but how he landed at Adobe is very interesting. He is a founder. Do you guys know that Google does ads? Right? So there's a whole field called search engine marketing. And one of the biggest of the biggies in search engine marketing was a company called Efficient Frontier. One of the early players and the biggest ones got acquired by Adobe 4 years ago, was it? Something like that. So he's now at Adobe. Before that, he was founder at eBoodle that got acquired by Shopzilla. Before that, DE Show, and he is, like Vakar, a graduate of Stanford. So tell us about Adobe.
Yeah, many of you probably know Adobe for Photoshop and Acrobat and Flash, but Adobe over the last 5 years has gotten into digital marketing in a big way, and it's a big growing business for Adobe. And I run the data science team for the digital marketing business. For digital marketing and marketing in general, the biggest problem that marketers face is they want to show that they are driving the business outcomes. They are influencing what's happening in the business in terms of the revenues that the business generate. And how to optimize that marketing impact is becoming more and more of a big data science problem. And that's what I'll be talking about in the next few slides. So if you think about how we buy these days, we use multiple devices, laptops, tablets, mobile phones. We have multiple touch points with the brand before we make the final purchase. So for marketers, the challenge is they need to reach the consumer, the customer, through different channels, and they have to spend money, run campaigns on all these different channels. So how do you take your marketing program and figure out a holistic way of optimizing what you're doing in all these different channels so that you maximize the impact, maximize the business outcomes that you generate from these marketing campaigns? And that's the marketing impacts problem. And it manifests itself at 3 levels. The first level is backward-looking analytics, trying to understand of all the different campaigns and channels that you are using for reaching your consumers, what's working, what's not working, figuring out the attribution to the channels. The second piece is how do I figure the best mix of marketing dollars that I should allocate to these different channels and campaigns to maximize the return that I get from my marketing campaigns. And the third level is the real-time execution side, which is how do I get the most impact in real time when I'm delivering my ads or delivering my marketing message or delivering my email. And that's the third piece. So I'll go over these 3 layers of problems in the next few slides. So the first problem, which is of analytics, is about the customer, as I told you, has multiple touch points with the brand, and if you have to get the data from all the different marketing channels and stitch this data to get a customer journey, which tells you all the different touch points that a customer went through before they ended up making a purchase or not making a purchase. And then based on these touch points and the end result that happened, you have to figure out what was the actual contribution of these different channels in getting the person to make a purchase or not. And marketers use various heuristic models. They might just give all the credit for the purchase to the last event that happened before the purchase or the first event that happened before the purchase, or somewhere in between. All models are wrong, of course, but at least there are some useful models which we think can help customers actually understand what is working and what is not working, and that's sort of the main goal of this whole attribution problem anyways. So if you look at what we do is we will look at these converting paths, and for each of these touch points, we assume that there is a certain impact and that impact decays at a certain rate. So search click will have a certain impact and it will decay at a certain rate. A display impression might have a smaller impact but might decay at a lower rate. And we'll take all these converting and non-converting paths and fit the data to find out what these impact and decay rates are, which influence the customer to finally make the purchase or not make a purchase. And using these estimates, we then come up with the equivalent of a financial statement for marketing, which tells you this is the amount you spent on marketing on these channels, and this is the revenue or the business impact that you had based on your marketing spend. But this, as I said, is backward-looking analytics, telling you what is working, what is not working, which channel is effective, which channel is not effective. Are you spending wasting your money on some channels or not? But does that really tell you how you should be spending your money in the future? Not really, because to determine how you want to optimally mix your marketing dollars across these different channels, you need to get the marketing response curve, which is the elasticity. If you increase your marketing spend by a certain amount, how do your business outcomes change? By what? So if you increase marketing by 10% in a specific channel, does your marketing result in 5% more business being generated? So that is one aspect. The other aspect is that marketing is more like a basketball game where different players are assisting each other and helping in the final purchase decision. So in order to capture the effect of these different channels working, for example, brand dollars might affect the social marketing. Social marketing might affect the number of search clicks that happen. And to capture that, as well as other effects like pricing effects or macroeconomic effects like interest rates or GDP growth rates, you need to have a hierarchical multiplicative model which captures all these effects and their elasticities or their effect on the business outcomes as you change them. There's also lags that different marketing channels have. So brand might work over a longer term and accumulate and decay at a different rate than something like search. So you have to capture the lag effects as well as the period of effect of any marketing that you're doing. So with these elasticities and these models of lags, you can then build a model which predicts, like, if you spend a certain amount of money or if you spend these amounts of money in these different channels, what's your likely revenue going to be? And then you can make optimization decisions where you say, for a specific business outcome or a specific level of revenue, what should my marketing mix be? Where should I spend my money most effectively to get that revenue outcome at the least amount of spend? So the other piece is with the lags and seasonality. You can combine that to make optimal flighting decisions as well. So if you are in a B2B business where most of the sales happen at the end of the quarter, you can do more of the top funnel activity at the beginning of the quarter and the lower funnel activity at the end of the quarter. And these decisions, again, can be made optimally through these lag models that I just showed. So just to summarize this, right? So to do these marketing mix models, you have to get all your marketing input data, your outcome data, which is the business results that you're looking to drive, the macro variables that are relevant to your business, come up with these elasticities, come up with these lags. Based on that, you come up with a scenario planning situation which you optimize the mix, and then you come up with a flighting plan that optimizes the timing of these campaigns and how much you spend on those campaigns. And this data then eventually flows into the marketing platform or the delivery engines. And that brings me to the third problem, which is how do you take this data and deliver real-time marketing impact, which is at the time marketing is shown to the user, how do you get the most marketing impact based on the data that you have? So this is a relatively newer field in the sense with customers being on multiple devices, always on, always connected, marketers have realized that they can no longer rely on having static campaigns. They need to be more responsive to what the consumer is doing. And that's where the big data and the data science starts coming into play, where you need to have predictive algorithms to take all the customer data that you have accumulated, the history, the preferences, the profile information, and use it to predict what their intent is, what their likely propensity to buy a specific product is. You need to be able to use machine learning to figure out which creative, what offer is likely to resonate and meet the expectations of that customer. And you need algorithms which can take this profile data, this content data, and deliver it through the various channels in order to get the most marketing impact based on the channel, based on the time, based on the delivery mechanism that you have. And that's where you have two sets of problems. One is the problem of optimizing the customer journey, where you know that the customer is going to go through different channels, different devices, different touch points to get to making the purchase. How do you get the person efficiently from awareness to consideration to purchase to a repeat purchase? And that becomes a data-driven orchestration problem. And the second problem is the more interesting and fascinating problem, which is how, what we call at Adobe the last millisecond problem. The last millisecond is sort of the moment of truth for marketing, where the person interacts with the marketing, the touch point where the marketing is touching the person. It could be a user action, like a person going to a website. It could be a person opening up an email from the brand. It could be a event where the customer is looking at a Facebook message that you posted, or it could be a real-time ad that you see when you go to a website. At that point in time, you have to take all the information that you know about the user. You have to be able to listen to what the user has done in the past, as well as the current context in which the user is operating, the time, the site. Maybe he's at a Yahoo Finance section. Maybe it's early in the morning. And he has been to your website a few times in the last few hours. So all that information, you need to bring it together. Based on that, you have to make a prediction as to what's the best offer likely to resonate with this person at this time to have the most marketing impact. And last but not the least, you have to then assemble the creatives and deliver it on that device or in that environment that you are showing the person, the creative. And this all happens in the last few milliseconds. It's the moment of truth where marketing meets the user and delivers the user the experience which will make the person either make the purchase or decide to abandon the brand and go to something else. And to get to this moment of truth where marketing has its moment of delivering the impact, that's where I think a lot of the effort is now being built, because not only you have to do with large amounts of data, but your responsiveness has to be very fast as well. And you need to be able to deliver the person the best consumer experience in real time across all these channels. And that's where the big challenge comes in. So just to give you an example, so this is how it looks like, right? So you have the data about the user, the attribution run against that data. That then flows into the various delivery mechanisms that you have, whether it's advertising or email. When you find the user, the person is unlikely to be a person purchasing from this merchant, but you show that ad, you increase the probability of that person purchasing by showing the right ad. When the person clicks on the ad and lands on a page, you give that offer, which increases the probability of the person purchasing even further. You might get them to follow you on Twitter or like them on like you on Facebook, and that further increases the probability of them transacting with you in the future. You might follow up with an email with a product offering that you think they might be interested in, and that further increases the probability of purchase. And when they come to your website, you give them good recommendations and a good offer, which further increases the probability and gets them to make the final purchase. So orchestration of this and figuring out through attribution what the right offer plus messaging medium should be is sort of the big challenge of driving marketing impact in real time. So with that, I would like to take questions.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions. So, yes, right there.
So Anil, I think this audience might benefit from, I think, something you and I have discussed quite a bit against your framing here, of approximations which are either valid or invalid in these, because much of this optimization is based on association models, and I think you and I have discussed attribution models and causality, right? So how do you validate, given the complexity of these models, right? Validation is quite a challenge in some sense, right? So how do you validate this? So you think of the first attribution part, which then drives the others. Do you do some large-scale approximate causal statistics to see how well the associations model is working, or what do you do to validate these?
Yeah, so I think the validation of the models, as I said, all models are wrong. But you can make useful models which can help you do better decisioning. And better decisioning manifests itself in the form of being able to deliver better results and better business outcomes, right? So you can say you have the best attribution model, but if your decisions that you make based on those attribution models don't drive business performance, then you cannot, even though it might be the best mathematical model, it is not useful, right? So to validate it, you have to actually make decisions using those models and see what impact it has. And then you make the call of whether the model is good or not, right? So with the media mix, for example, there's a very clear prediction that you're making. You're saying that if you do the mix in this possible breakdown, you will drive this business outcome. And companies that we sell to rely on that. So they want to target a 10% growth rate from year 2015 to 2016. They want to figure out how much they should increase their marketing budgets by, right? For making that decision, they need a model to figure out, okay, where should I spend my money and how much more money should I spend over the next year in order to get to that goal. And those decisions then would be driven by this model. I mean, of course, there's some real-time adjustments, and every few months you have to adjust these models, but they should be able to use it to make that call and not be short of the goals that they set out to reach based on the models, right? So, and we have validation frameworks where we would take the predictions, compare it against what we predicted versus what happened in reality, and be able to explain what the anomaly is. And if we haven't captured certain things, we would put that in the model for the next iteration.
Other questions? Yeah. Okay. Any questions in the back?
So a question about model management. So it sounds like you've done an excellent job with having hundreds or thousands of models. What advice would you give for other companies that are coming up to speed on managing lots of models, especially real-time models? A lot of times people might underestimate certain kinds of infrastructure. You know, models have a life cycle. They need to get retired, refreshed, or they need to be explained, or need to be tracked. So I guess words of wisdom on model management.
Yeah, so models are constantly evolving, and models also need to be different for different verticals, different businesses, different kinds of business models need different models. And many times when you talk to companies, they would have a sense of the models that they would like to use or they have used in the past that they want you to refine on, right? So providing a model workbench is what we do. We allow companies that use our product to use the models that we provide, but also create their own models in the system with the data that we have, and apply those models and use these different models to compare what they would get, run scenarios versus against those models to see what one model would predict versus what another model would predict. Does that answer your question?
Going into production is pretty quick and easy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, there's a question in the back. The mic is over there, so. No. Come back.
Hi, curious to know your thoughts on combination of metrics of interest. Typically, there are more than one which you want to optimize, and what I've observed is it's probably possible to find convexity bounds on one of the metrics, but when you combine them, the bounds pretty much fade out. And like people use weighted, linear versus or non-linear ways of combining the metrics, but many times they are like the business sort of overrules the science in deciding the weights. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on how to combine, like find out those combination of metrics for optimization.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ronnie mentioned in his talk as well, right? It's usually important to have one objective function that you are looking to optimize, right? And get consensus around that objective function.
But he's saying, what if that objective function is a combination of
Yes.
business metrics?
Yeah, so any linear combination, I think, with weights is fine, right? I think that to predict is, that to model and predict is relatively the same as working with one metric. And so we get customers to specify an objective function, and most marketeers have some sense in terms of what business metrics they're looking to optimize, and it's pretty linear in which they specify it. So I haven't encountered where they had a need for a fancy non-convex metric or a non-linear metric in the sense of what they wanted to get to.
So any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, so there's a question up front, and then I actually have a question too.
Anil, curious to know your thoughts on the attribution. I've seen many times companies or groups go about the attribution problem, but then eventually, come up with simple heuristics like last click attribution, etc. Right? And this has repeated itself many times. What are you seeing, and what are some best practices on thinking about attribution?
So,
Yeah.
Anil, in the category of great minds think alike, that was my question, but I would like to state it even stronger.
Okay.
So my experience has been, no matter what fancy methodology you come up with, everybody in the end seems to fall off onto the last click attribution because that's all marketers understand. What's your comment on this, and especially when you spend so much of your talk talking about attribution?
Yeah. So actually, so that was the case a few years ago, where people would just be comfortable using the last click. And I think if you go in, just go to the search marketeer, or just go to the display advertiser, person who spends on display advertising, or the person who spends on social advertising, they, in their specific channels, might still go with the last click methodology, or the first click, or whatever, even distribution methodology, right? But I'm seeing that more and more organizations, as they realize that, two things actually. One is basically that when they add up all the conversions, they find that they have 7 times the more conversions, 7 times, people claiming credit for 7x the revenue that was generated, and there's no way to rationalize it at the CMO level, right? The second piece is that with big data, now it's possible to actually take the data from these different channels and silos and combine and stitch it and get that holistic view. And people are saying, now that you have the holistic view, how do I now make these decisions between these different channels as to what's working and what's not working? So it's not happening at the channel level, but it's happening at the CMO level, where they are being forced to rationalize across these different campaigns.
So let me challenge you further,
yeah,
and ask you to share with us a particular case study where a marketer actually looked at anything beyond last click attribution, seriously looked at it, and then used it in the business. And
yeah.
Sorry if I sound aggressive, but this is a sore spot.
So there are now actually I can give you not one but like 10, 15 customers who do that. So what happens? You have a company like a retailer, a big retailer in the UK, right, where they are spending on different channels, right, and they are saying that you can optimize whatever you want with whatever metric you want on search and whatever you want on display, but I will be measuring your performance based on this metric, this attribution metric, right? So they are combining the data and building this attribution, and then saying that even though you are saying the cost per acquisition is $20, I think it's more like $60. So then you push them to the next level. So the search marketer is saying that I need to look good on this metric. So they are saying that, okay, now we are going to send you feeds which will tell at the keyword level what the attribution is at that top level, and can you now optimize to that new metric? So that's being sort of forced top down. Bottom up, people are resistant, right? They are happy with what they have in terms of last click, but it is being pushed top down because that's how they are getting measured performance by, and the business guys who are giving them dollars on these different channels are saying that I'm going to be giving it based on this metric, and that's forcing the channel level guys to start using the non-last click metrics.
Please join me in thanking Anil for taking these tough questions.